we're going to get into that. And we're going to talk about the game in depth. And we're going to tell you where we were right. And we were right about a lot of stuff. And we'll tell you about the things that we were wrong about, because we did get a couple things wrong. But I think we called exactly how this game was going to go. Mainstream sports media missed it completely as far as what the story was and the narrative. And I think you and I really broke down what was going to happen. It happened almost exactly like we said it was going to happen. Now, it didn't go into overtime like you said, but I think the scenarios that you and I worked out and talked about worked out almost exactly like we talked about. Again, we'll get into that later. Now, when we started this podcast, you came out right away. You came out guns blazing. You were saying that you were excited about the Super Bowl, but we held off the conversation a little bit because I didn't want to jump right into it. But the one thing I want to tell everybody is that, again, this is actually just bragging, so it may come off wrong, but we were right on this podcast. And there's a reason that I'm telling you this. To me, just like mainstream media has been almost supplanted for a lot of people by independent media because of the uncontrolled bias that we see in the regular media, whether it's Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, whatever you're watching, whatever team your politician is on, it's completely biased news. You never get the real story. Well, sports media has kind of come the same way. And sports media never gives us the real story. They give us the story that they want us to have. And the NFL could not have had a better story for the Super Bowl. You got Tom Brady, who may be the greatest quarterback of all time, against Patrick Mahomes, the one that everyone assumes will be the next great quarterback. And he's already fantastic. But the reality of it is, and I've been saying this all year long, is that Patrick Mahomes has come down to earth a little bit. Now, he still makes great plays. He really does. You still watch him every once in a while and go, wow, what the heck was that? Nobody else can do that. But he was not as good this year as he was in years prior. So building this up as the Brady versus Mahomes Super Bowl, you and I both agreed on this show that it was a mistake. Now, that was not a story that you heard on ESPN. It was not a story that you heard on Fox Sports. It was not a story that you heard any CBS Sports. They were all pumping the same story at us. But your story and my story were the same. The Kansas City Chiefs offensive line is decimated, crushed right now. And they are going to have problems with what is a very, very, very good Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive line. And listen, I don't know if you watched any of the pregame, but I watched an interview with Pierre Paul. And Pierre Paul was literally salivating, licking his lips, thinking about going against that Kansas City offensive line. Those guys were jacked. I mean, jacked. They were ready to go, buddy. And they took over that game, and I mean, it was brutal. What can you tell us about the game that happened?
Okay, so you're right about the mainstream media, of course, favoring one side of the story because they have been desensitized that the Chiefs have been the more dominant team throughout like 2 years already. Mahomes hasn't lost for like weeks. But let's not forget the fact, and this is one of the most underrated stories during their match in the regular season, is that the Buccaneers only lost by 3 points, even though Tyreek Hill had 269 and 3 touchdowns. Yep. So that's just one field goal. So regardless of what you say about Tyreek Hill, the Buccaneers were right there with the Kansas City Chiefs throughout the game. It's just a matter that they didn't score enough. And I guess the moment that Eric Fisher went out, the moment that announcement came out, all of those pass rushers in Tampa Bay suddenly felt like Christmas again because they had the free reign on Patrick Mahomes, and it was evident throughout the game. Mahomes was just running for his dear life in like most of the possessions, especially in the second half. If not for those intentional groundings and those missed passes that he just threw at the last second, there could have been more than 3 sacks for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So officially, they have registered 3 sacks, but it felt like they should have had like 7 or 8, just because of that dominating performance by the Tampa Bay front 7, essentially. And one injury for the the Kansas City O-line rather, messed up like the entire line. Technically, you thought it was just one person, but because they had to do patchwork on that O-line, so they had to put right guard Remmers on left tackle, So he always gets the best rusher. So be it a Barrett or a Pierre Paul or even sometimes in King Sue. So that spells trouble. I feel like after Super Bowl 55, once he sleeps, he still sees the faces of those three people because they've been just constantly in his face. And because he was put to right guard, so they had to put another right guard, and they had to elevate Wisniewski to the O line. So that messed up three positions, but essentially the entire offensive line of Kansas City was decimated or was
Yeah.
affected. And
Listen, Wisniewski wasn't even good enough to play in Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh did not have a good offensive line. So Wisniewski started the season in Pittsburgh. He ends up getting hurt. They move him. They won't even put him on the regular roster. They keep him on the practice squad, and Kansas City pulls him off the practice squad because he was unprotected. That's how little Pittsburgh thought of Wisniewski this year. So this is a guy that ends up starting the Super Bowl, and along with two guys that have never played tackle before. I mean, it was just, listen, you said it before. It honestly looked like Patrick Mahomes caught the snap and was being hunted immediately. That was one of the worst offensive line plays I've ever seen in a Super Bowl, Lance. I've never seen anything worse. But go ahead.
Yeah, indeed. So some stats about that O-line. So Kansas City used my 5-man protection on 92% of dropbacks. So only 4 plays were in, they used more than 5. So if you have 5 guys who haven't played much throughout the season, and essentially their positions during the Super Bowl is their temporary position. I mean, Remmers is not really a left tackle. I mean, Eric Fisher is a Pro Bowler, so it's hard to replace him with one game, much less a Super Bowl. So that spells trouble because you have to bring in extra protection because you know what's coming. You have a Barrett, a Pierre Paul, a Sue, or sometimes Vita Vea can also break through the line of scrimmage. And there have been instances wherein he was just chasing Mahomes, even though he didn't have the speed, but the pressure was there all for the entire game, essentially. So the Kansas City offensive line has been the weakest link, the Achilles heel of this game. It hasn't been Patrick Mahomes because if he only had time, he could hit Kelsey and he could hit the Tyreek Hill downfield.
So when we talked about this game, and I don't want to keep going back and beating this dead horse, but when we talked about this game, we said that there were 2 things that were going to happen here. First of all, Kansas City was going to be in trouble and with the offensive line against that pass rush. We said that. We were one of the only places that said that here at What's on Sports. We beat that subject to death. We also said that Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, as great a coaches as they are considered to be, are not great adjustment coaches. And there's a lot of people that say that they make adjustments, and I'm talking about like wholesale adjustments. You're talking about a team that literally their quarterback ran for his life on almost every drop back, and still on 92% of their pass plays, never kept the tight end to chip, never kept the fullback in the chip, instead kept putting everybody out into patterns and gave Mahomes no time. If it was any other quarterback besides Patrick Mahomes, or maybe Lamar Jackson, there would have been a lot more sacks. Mahomes was magical in getting away and being able to actually get rid of the ball. Now, with that being said, I've heard a lot of people complain about some of the ticky-tack type of fouls and penalties that were called on Kansas City in the defensive secondary. And I could see somebody's point for that. But as a counterbalance to that, I will say that Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes were allowed on several occasions, at least 2 or 3 occasions, to intentionally ground the ball inside the tackle boxes and was not called. So it should have been much bigger losses. It should have been much bigger sack totals. At the very least, it should have been some intentional groundings that would have cost them a down and a lot of distance. And listen, I'm so shocked that they didn't make the adjustments. This was like watching, I went to the Super Bowl and watched Andy Reid lose his first Super Bowl, Philadelphia against New England. And New England had figured out what Andy Reid was going to do before he got there. And Reid and Donovan McNabb never made the adjustments to fix what was going on. So it cost them. It ended up costing them a Super Bowl because they just couldn't figure it out until the end. Now, that was a more competitive Super Bowl than this one was. This wasn't even a contest. This was an embarrassment of a quote unquote Super Bowl, in my opinion. But I will say I told everybody about Kansas City. I was telling people that. Nobody was listening. Again, I called this entire game. I'm super proud of what happened. What can you tell me about Tom Brady, though? Everybody's talking about Tom Brady. Obviously, we would be remiss in having this conversation without talking about the guy who just won his not fourth, not fifth, not sixth, but his 7th Super Bowl, now with a completely different team, albeit a loaded team, but still 7th Super Bowl.
Yep. Well, Tom Brady. We did have an article at Watson Sports entitled "It's Not Wise to Bet Against Tom Brady," and we've just seen it in Super Bowl 55. Why it's not wise to bet against Tom Brady. So there has been a lot of first for Tom Brady in this game. So apparently, after 10 Super Bowls, this is the first game that he had a touchdown in the first quarter and had a lead after the first quarter. So all of his 9 Super Bowls, he did either a 0-0 tie or the other team was leading. So this is the first time with that pass to Gronkowski, an 8-yard pass to Gronkowski, that he had a lead after one quarter. And it just snowballed after that, mainly because they were able to establish the run game with Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. So once Fournette and Jones was able to penetrate through that Kansas City D-line, and of course, like we've mentioned before, the weak point of the Kansas City defense, which is the line area. So they were constantly getting like 5, 6, 7 yards. So once they have established that, they were able to activate the play action. And check this out, this stat from Next Gen Stats. So all 3 touchdown passes of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are from play action. So that statement alone says a lot, that the running game was effective to an extent that they were able to keep the drive going, A. B, they were able to create play action. That's why they got 3 touchdown passes. And the knockout punch of them all, Leonard Fournette was able to get a touchdown with that fantastic pull block by Marpet to give their 4th touchdown of the game. And Suckup just added 1 field goal to make it 31. So it was really a methodical, precise, precision game offensively for Tom Brady. We wouldn't expect anything else for someone who has been there 10 times. He doesn't have any like butterflies in the stomach anymore.
Oh, no.
So
listen, I let me tell you how this game really played out. And people who don't look at this from a 3D perspective didn't realize what was happening. Kansas City came in with a defense that wasn't very good at stopping the run. Listening to the interview with Fournette after the game, Fournette said that Brady kept telling him, listen, these guys lead the league in being the worst team for yards after catch and being the worst team for yards after contact. So what he was letting them know is that this is not a great tackling team. It's not a technically sound team. And also, if you watched Kansas City throughout the playoffs, they ran about 45% dime coverage. Now, dime coverage is 4 down linemen, 1 linebacker, and the rest are all defensive backs. And what Kansas City was doing in order to create all these pressures was they were bringing guys off the edge, and you never knew who was coming. So Tampa Bay had the perfect offense set up in the first quarter for that. They open up the game. They go deep on like the second throw of the game. You're like, wow, they're really going to stretch the field. Kansas City's got the mindset. They're going to stretch the field. They're going to do what they've been doing all year long. And what does Tampa do? Tampa doesn't do that. Tampa stays dedicated to a ground game where they averaged, I believe, 6 yards a run. They stay dedicated to a ground game. Fournette played with a passion, with like serious beast mode. That guy wanted to be unstoppable, and he was. Ronald Jones came in right after him, played really well as well. But when they weren't doing that, if you noticed, a lot of short passes. Wasn't a typical Bruce Arians, no risk it, no biscuit type of offense that you saw here. A lot of short passes, a lot of screens, a lot of creative screens, a lot of little quick dumps. Let's hit Gronk real quick. Let's hit the Antonio Brown real quick. Let's hit the little sweet stuff. That opened up everything because the defensive coordinator for Kansas City didn't know what to do. He had to stop all the pressure. He was like, okay, I got to stop the pressure. Now when he stops the pressure, Brady's like, oh, you're going to be in zone because you think we're running the ball. So you've got to respect the play action. You're in zone. Now I'm hitting play action. Boom. Now I can go over top of the 1 or 2 linebackers that you're actually playing with. They completely took Kansas City out of what was supposed to be their game. A brilliantly called game by Byron Leftwich. If Byron Leftwich is really in charge of that offense, like Bruce Arians says he is, if he runs it completely, like Arian says, then he should be up for a head coaching job next year. That was absolutely masterful and fantastic. That entire coaching staff deserves a huge round of applause for what they did. Tom Brady won the MVP. In my opinion, the coaching staff is the MVP of that game. The defensive line was second, and Brady, who I have a ton of respect for, would be third on my list of guys.
Yeah, if only we can give the Super Bowl MVP to an entire unit, I would give it to the defense because they set the tone. And speaking of adjustments also, so remember during the regular season meeting, it was basically a single high safety and Carlton Davis was the guy covering Tyreek Hill. In this game, they essentially had like two guys on Hill for almost the entire game. So he had less than 100 yards. So Kansas City has nothing to do but to throw the passes to Kelsey because that's what Tampa Bay is giving them. But they cannot defeat Tampa Bay with Travis Kelsey alone. Tyreek Hill was covered for most of the game. And that's one of the reasons of their downfall. They only had 9 points without a touchdown in Super Bowl 55.
Kansas City never made the adjustments. We talked about that. And Kansas City got away from the run game way, way, way too quickly. They were averaging 7 yards a carry at one point. Why not stick with the run? They got behind a little bit, and they were like, oh, we got the greatest quarterback in the world. We're just going to throw the ball as much as we can. As soon as you realize that pass rush is killing you like that, what do? You should be running screens, and you should be running draw plays. Draw plays to your running back over and over again. Make those guys feel like, hey, if we step upfield too fast, he's going to beat us. Quarterback draws. The first quarter, Mahomes is running all over him. He's got pressure, but he's running all over them. They're calling design plays that get Mahomes out of the pocket and let him scramble. And I understand that you don't want Mahomes to run too much. You don't want to take too many hits. But it was working, and they got away from what was working. It was such a bizarre coaching choice, in my opinion. I thought it was just such a huge mistake. So, look, I I would like to say Kansas City is going to learn from this and move forward and become a better team. I don't know if that's actually going to be true. We're going to talk about which teams are actually favored to win next year's Super Bowl. Believe it or not, Tampa Bay is not the most favored team to win next year's Super Bowl. We're going to talk about that in a second.